As it says in the third chapter of the Shoshogi, once one has reached the state of completely and absolutely accepting the precepts, when one has truly accepted the precepts, Buddhahood is reached. Therefore, there is complete freedom. Only the honor and glory of God dwells on this mountain. Now, and of course, wisdom is the top. Now, I want to go through a poem that is at the beginning of the ascent of Mount Carmel, which, if you like to compare it to the early pictures in the lotus blossom, you'll find very close comparisons. One dark night, fired with love's urgent longings, I went out unseen, my house being now all stilled. That is a perfect expression of what happens in meditation, having become all stilled. Still not in the sense of being dead, but still in the sense of not doing anything volitionally. Obviously, one is going to breathe. But if one is deliberately trying to breathe or deliberately counting the breaths, in other words, if there is any artifice, nothing whatsoever will work. So there must be no sound, no noise, no deliberate creation. And the accent is on the word deliberate, creation of a manipulative thing. You cannot manipulate in this place. To become all stilled means literally to become all stilled. When a person meditates completely and absolutely, it is almost as though he does not breathe at all. As it says at the end of the lotus blossom, if the breathing is rough, then even the slightest twitch will surely break the rhythm. The roughness of the breath. This is the danger of continuing to count breaths in meditation for months and years after you no longer need to. It's very valuable if you don't know how to stop your mind wandering about, but once you have ceased that, once that has ceased, leave it be and just allow the breath to be normal. And when you are no longer conscious of this, when you have harmonized the breathing with the body and the spirit, when it has fallen away, so to speak, because it is a natural function and you are not concerned with it, when that has happened, then the house being all stilled, one can go forth on the journey. But the first part of this poem is very important. Fired with love's urgent longings. What is it that causes the love's urgent longings? Now, usually, and especially you'll find this true if you go through such works as Julian of Norwich and the like, people who have this experience do so as a result of being or seeming to be extraordinarily ill. And it has sometimes been said that they have caused the illness themselves in order to have the experience. I do not personally believe this. I have known several people who have had the experience, and I know for fact that none of them created that illness. It was very definitely an illness. Whichever theory one subscribes to, it should be realized, however, that that which gets the journey going, first of all, is grabbing responsibility for one's life and saying, no, I will not be irresponsible any longer. And secondly, a longing to return to a higher state than to continue as one is. And this comes out as fired with love's urgent longing. and it is a very urgent longing. As I told you before with the lotus blossom with myself, what I wanted to do was, if I'm going to die, I want to do a finest job of it I possibly can, because I do not want to have to come back again. So let's do it thoroughly once and be done with the thing. An urgent longing to be done with this state in order to return to a much greater, higher, purer state than it is possible to know. In darkness and unseen, by the secret ladder disguised, in darkness and concealment, my house being now all stilled. Now, he bends over backwards to explain parts of this, but having done it, and know a fair number of people who have done it, I would say the following. The secret ladder here referred to is, of course, faith. The secret ladder is always faith. But in darkness and concealment, in darkness and secure, in darkness and concealment, anyone who feels a third Kensho coming on, and I have known a few, invariably find the person they can absolutely trust most and say, now don't call anybody, don't call the doctor, don't do this, don't do that, just leave me alone, I'll be fine. And it is not until one has actually made the most dangerous part of that ascent that one usually lets that very best friend know what one has been doing. And there is very, very good reason for this. As I told you in a much earlier lecture, the beginning of a third Kensho looks very much like a psychotic break, except that there is none of the fear and the terror that one experiences in such a thing. You can tell by the person how quiet and peaceful he is, whilst at the same time he may be giggling or crying his eyes out or looking terrified, but there is this underlying peace. And when he says to you with his eyes pouring water, don't worry, I'm just fine, just leave me alone, that is the time to just leave him alone. And therefore all this early part, which I showed you in the first 5 pictures in the lotus blossom, all that early part has to be done in darkness and secure, and in concealment. I can remember saying to Daizui, who was looking after me when mine was going on, look, sometime I'm going to tell you a lot, but not yet. Because he would look in every now and then and say, well, how are you? What's going on? What can I do? No, don't bother. In some time I will tell you. And when the time is safe, when one has done that dangerous part which people can misunderstand, then one can start to talk. Now, obviously, the people who wrote these 2 books, St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa, did not dare speak of this, or they would possibly have ended up very dead. On that glad night, in secret, for no one saw me, nor did I look at anything, with no other light or guide than the one that burned in my heart, which guided me, more surely than the light of noon, to where he waited for me, in a place where no one else appeared. O guiding night, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that has united the lover with his beloved, transforming the beloved into her lover. That is the best description of what happens from about plate 14 to plate 27 in the lotus blossom, of which I know. But there is a very interesting point here, transforming the beloved in her lover. The lover and his beloved, transforming the beloved in her lover, can best be described, I think, or more accurately be described, in the host in guest and guest in host theories of the Goi theory. which I had intended doing and which I'll try and get to next week, because we are never going to be able to get through the whole of this today. I want to go on, I want to work on the part we've just done. He speaks of how important it is to deprive oneself of an appetite for worldly possessions. This denial and privation is like a night for all of the senses. If you cannot understand through the gateway of the senses, how will you ever find the way, no matter how far distant you may walk, says the Buddhist scripture. You see, it is not until you have actually deprived yourself, actually deprived the senses themselves, that you can really and truly know what it is like, what a sizable thing getting rid of all these appetites is. And one of the purposes of having so little in a Zen monastery is to teach one how little one really needs. As I'm sure you know, those of you who've been to Shasta, each monk has but one place in which to sit. He has, which is also the place on which he sleeps in the meditation hall. There are two cupboards, one for his bedding and one for his private possessions. Behind that, the piece of wood in front of the space, which is, imagine, this would actually make a very nice ton. If you imagine there's a monk and a monk and a monk, and this is 6'3" long, and there is a piece of wood at each end going along the front of the whole lot, which acts as one's table for food and other things, and the cupboards are where you are all sitting, and then everybody sits on their seats. And that is all the space that you have. And you see, if you complain about it, a person, as somebody once did in Sorji, it is, how much space do you need? Well, let me think. And the answer is, well, lie down on the floor, and they will go round you with a tape measure, right? You need, well, you don't really need 6'3". You are only 5'10". What do you actually need? How much is necessary? All right? How much food do you really need? Not nearly as much as most of us want, which is a totally different thing. How much sleep? How much clothing? Supposing one has 5 suits, one can only wear one at a time. That does not mean that a monk is supposed to have one robe. He's supposed to have 3, one summer, one winter, and one in the wash. I've never quite worked out which one was supposed to be in the wash, but that's neither here nor there. You see what I am saying, though? How much is actually necessary? And at a later date, even St. John of the Cross points out that certain things are necessary. But what you are doing is you are finding out how much you really need. Not how much you can do without, not how much you can be deprived. Don't take this from the negative point of view, but how much do you really need? Which is a very different thing, and a very positive way of looking at it. To deprive oneself, to be constantly, doing penance, that's one thing. But how much does one need? It's amazing how much of what St. John of the Cross has said has been perverted down the centuries. He was merely saying, what do you need? So, if you cannot understand through the gateway of the senses that you do not really in the end need anything, you can never find the road into this. But you see, you don't really get to the state when you're willing to throw everything out until you're desperate enough to climb the mountain. And the time that most of us are desperate enough is when we haven't got much time left. It is then that we stop worrying about career, stop worrying about family, stop worrying about what's for lunch and the like, and it is by golly, I've got to do something about me. And it is then that the way opens up, this center way, the way up the mountain. It is singularly interesting that the ascent of Mount Carmel, the ascent of Mount Sumeru, which is what the Buddhist one is called, and the ascent of Mount Sinai in Judaism, all seem to have to do identically with the same things. If you remember, Moses came down with the tablets of the commandments off of the top of Mount Sinai. Every Buddhist, after he has ascended Mount Sumeru, comes back believing in and keeping the precepts absolutely. And St. John of the Cross says the only way in which one can truly get to the top of Mount Carmel is if one keeps the precepts, i.e. the commandments in this case, absolutely. Here is a second similarity. The first is that the way in is identically the same. The second is that you can't get to the top of it without precepts, preceptual truth, or commandments, whichever way you like to look at it. And the nice thing is that it doesn't really matter whether you think of God inside of yourself or outside of yourself. That becomes an irrelevant question, like, does Father Christmas sleep with his beard in or out the bed? It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that you go up the mountain. In this place, in this desperate place, doctrine falls away, is what I'm saying. Doctrine ceases to be of importance. All that matters is that the soul, or the spirit, or that part of you which is the cosmic Buddha, all that matters is that that shall go and return to the cosmic Buddha, or to God, or to Allah, or whatever you like to call it, or to Yahweh. It doesn't matter. And the beauty of the love of the cosmic Buddha is that he is perfectly willing to show himself in any screen whatsoever, or as a big loving pink blob to an atheist, which is a really beautiful description of it in Life After Life by Dr. Moody, who, there was a doctor in this particular case who had a near-death experience who was an atheist, and he is met and enveloped by this lovely, gorgeous, loving pink blob, which is fine. The cosmic Buddha can work it whatever, by any means whatsoever. Whatever turns you on, in other words, that's what he'll use. But just think of the size of the love that will do that. That can cut through all our idiocies, all our private notions, and appear in any form or through any screen, according to how you like to look at it, that will make you personally most comfortable and most anxious and most eager to return. But again, there are these things that are always the same. And later I'm going to be talking to you about the Taoist way in which this is done. It is always the same. First, there is the throwing out of everything, because nothing now matters nearly so much as returning to God or to the cosmic Buddha. This is brought about frequently by trauma, usually by the fact that there isn't much time left and we can't be bothered with all this idiocy now. What we have to do is get on and do it. And the next thing is the realization that the only way one can do it is by cleaning up one's life absolutely. And the next thing is, in cleaning up one's life absolutely, realizing that the only way to the top is by accepting completely and absolutely the full meaning of the commandments or the precepts. The three main signposts, if you like, of the journey. Now, I want to digress for a moment. Well, it's not digress, really. There's a very interesting thing here about the three nights, or the three kenshos. It's interesting that St. John calls them the three nights of the soul, and that Buddhism calls it the three kenshos, each one being slightly higher than the next. There is a very old manuscript which we have a copy of. The Chinese priest who ordained me very kindly sent me all, I think it was 140-odd volumes of the Chinese Tripitaka, which is all the Buddhist scriptures ever written. People say that Buddhism has no scriptures. You should see the size of those volumes. And we are sort of trying to translate stray bits and pieces of them. There is one which is quite fascinating on this 3 nights, shall we call it, or 3 kanchos. This is a monk asking his master. This was translated from something that was written, we're not sure of the exact date. It was definitely not before the 5th century, and possibly as late as the 12th or 13th. The monk is asking questions. The filial son keeps the raising of the seed to prolong life, scripture. What a lovely name for a scripture. In other words, the true son of the Buddha keeps the raising of the seed to prolong life. In other words, wishes to return to God. The scripture of how to do it. And it says this: the 3 parasites, all parasites live in men. The 3 are as generals of an army that is invading man's 5-fold treasury. That is, that which composes his body and mind. The higher one likes chariots, horses, and fine clothes. The middle one similarly leads men to like delicious food. The lowest leads men to prefer sexual pleasure. These 3 parasites are the roots of the 3 poisons: greed, anger, and delusion. The 3 parasites lead men to careless and reckless enjoyment, always looking for what can be turned to their own advantage. There follow a lot of questions and answers from the monk, and then, why do these parasites tend to lead people to an early death? Answer: they desire to remain unconverted, with free access to all of a man's energy. Therefore they wish followers of the way, that is, those who are in true training, to die quickly. By what means do these parasites attempt to get people to die quickly? When a man has reached the night of Genshen, Genshen is literally translated as dark night, which is fascinating. A Chinese word that literally means one of the 3 dark nights. When a man has reached the night of Genshen, they are exhausted, and so try to go to the ruler of heaven to tell him of all the wrongdoing of this follower of the way. Thus they try to cut short his registered period of life and cause his spirit to be reborn in an animal form, leaving themselves free reign on the earth. Now, at the first of the 3 kanchos, during those first 5 pictures in the lotus blossom and going up the actual mountain, going up the center, everything that one has ever done wrong appears with a vengeance. And it appears and it takes form and shape. And one must either put it right or attempt to put it right. And there literally seems to be something that is whispering all the evil it can about you to stop you putting it right. Now, this particular scripture tells you how to stay in meditation and solemnly resolve to put everything right. And in so doing, one exhausts the first of the 3 parasites. That is the first one. Now, if you remember, I brought a scroll last week that showed you 2 of the circuits, 2 of the circles. Do you remember that? And I hadn't been able to paint the 3rd one because I hadn't had time. That explains the first one. Now, when one has dealt with all that side of oneself, one has solemnly determined to put right everything that one has done wrong that one can possibly put right, and one is actually doing it, then comes the end of the first circle. One is allowed to see the moon, as it were. One is allowed to see the reflection of God. One cannot see him yet. One is allowed to see the moon of Zen, the reflection of Zen. And this is where most people stop, and unfortunately it is where most Zen masters teach from. But in fact they should go on to the next one. For when you do the next one, when you deal with the next parasite, that which you root out is the dislike, no, that's the wrong word, aversion to the actual precepts. And in accepting them absolutely, one reaches the top of the mountain. But there is still something that is above the mountain, which is the third one, which I will try to deal with next time. Genshin, as I said, means literally to change or come to a new era in the depth of the night. In the depth of the night, to change in the darkness, the soul that grows in the dark night of the soul. In one sense, it refers to that state which Christian mystics have called the dark night of the soul, a period of spiritual aridity, torment, and questioning, in which faith is strengthened and one's attachments are weakened so that one may be drawn into closer union with the infinite. Now, do the three parasites have other ways of harming people in particular parts of their bodies besides leading them into lusts, desires, enjoyments, and rage? And the answer is yes. And the old monk goes into explanations of how and why, and he then goes on to explain what one should do and how to do it by moxa burning or by using acupuncture or by using what we use here, mudras, in this particular book. There was a very interesting comment, again on the long search, on Channel 54 last night. I don't know if any of you were able to watch it. It was on, interestingly enough, on the doings of Californians. And the commentator made a very important point. He said that a lot of people laugh about what happens in California, but what people do not realize is that whereas the means by which someone searches may occasionally be ludicrous, one should not laugh at the need, for we all need to make the search. It just depends how we do it. He then said something that was, I think, is extraordinarily valuable. He said that people have misunderstood the meaning of the term holy. In its original meaning, if you get a really good dictionary, it comes out to being whole, spirit, body, and mind. To be holy was to be whole, in a sense that is beyond normal wholeness. So a holy person was a person who had harmonized body and mind completely and absolutely. And that the Christians gradually changed the word down the centuries. Exactly how, I'm not sure, but I do know that a number of words changed their meaning over the centuries. For example, the word naughty at the time of Shakespeare was the worst swear word you could use about anyone. When someone had committed about 7 or 8 murders, the worst thing that Shakespeare could say of her was, "Thou most naughty woman." And you could almost hear everybody dying of shame in the auditorium. So words do change over the centuries, and it is unfortunate that the word holy has become to mean something that is almost not quite, well, nobody really wants to be thought of as holy nowadays, but everybody wants to be thought of as whole. And maybe we should start putting the word back to its rightful use, a wholeness that is beyond whole. Now, one of the things that the 3 parasites does is very carefully work on various parts of the body, which will cause discomfort of body so that one can't be bothered really to work at meditation. It's too much fag, it's too tiring, and gradually cause a person not to do anything whatsoever. I believe in the same section that I was reading from, yes, characteristics of the spiritual illness that these three parasites create. All diseases are mild at first, only later becoming serious. One gradually becomes completely debilitated and wastes away. One is as a fish in a river that is drying up. There is no realization that death is imminent. But it is also when one is as a fish in the river that is drying up that one can suddenly turn and say, no, I'm not going to let this thing dry up, and immediately starts finding the entrance to the mountain. If one has good intentions in the morning but loses them by noon, it will be a long time before these intentions show any results. Body and mind will wither if inflamed by anxiety, which these three parasites can cause. Disease will arise if one tries to dwell with right thought, but is lazy, has no appetite, and always wants to sleep. I've met an awful lot of monks like that. Oh, I don't like the food, I want more sleep. And you know that they will not make it this time round unless they really grasp the three parasites: greed, hate, and delusion. The Chinese have three nice names for them, which I won't go into. The Chinese like to be graphic. Disease will arise if, in trying to raise the way-seeking mind, that is the mind of one who truly wishes to return to God or the cosmic Buddha, at the wrong time, if one wishes to raise this mind at the wrong time, one cries rudely from anger and frustration at not being able to raise it. Damn it, why can't I do it? I've worked hard. I've stormed heaven. Why can't I get? Why doesn't God want me? That's trying to do it the wrong way and the wrong time. And we have all heard people talk that way. I'm sure you all have at some time or other. Why is this happening to me? Look at what I have done. Conversely, disease will arise if one gives oneself over to debauchery, scornfulness, or anger towards others at the right time for raising the way-seeking mind. Yeah, of course I've got all the opportunities, but, well, look, I've got so-and-so on tomorrow, and I've got such and such on tomorrow. We are only given so many opportunities, all of us. The Christian church says all are called, many are called, but few chosen. The Buddhist church says all are called, but few answer. Now, it's identically the same thing. And this is what they're speaking of here, being invited and saying, oh, I've got too much to do, I want to do my own thing. The call does not come all that often. At the same time, this disease may be caused if one brings up the passions or breaks off one's training. At the time of the important thing, that is, when the spirit rises to greet the Lord, one should lie down on one's left side if one wishes to die, or on one's right side if one wishes to live. In other words, get on with it. Get on with the meditation. Make it clear what you want to do. Now, it is interesting that St. John of the Cross speaks of those 3 nights, and he also speaks of what has to happen on those 3 nights. He speaks of one who was ordered to wait 3 nights before any union with the true spirit. And on the first night, he was to burn a fish heart, symbolizing the fact that the human heart that was attached to worldly things was to be consumed. We wouldn't do anything like that. But in meditation, he is speaking here of an Old Testament person who had these 3 nights. And he is saying how one must, of oneself, burn one's own heart, consume one's own heart, the desires within it, if one would get back to this first stage. which is identically the same as cleansing out all of the things that one has done of which I spoke. On the second night, it is necessary to be admitted into the society of the holy patriarchs, the fathers of the faith. This only comes after one has accepted completely and absolutely the commandments, i.e. the precepts. So the second one comes in the same way. And if you look in the lotus blossom, there is a piece in one of the scriptures which says that when one behaves in this way, all the holy persons from ages past will come and greet you with great pleasure. Now, if you look at plates 25 and 26, you'll find those quotations. And on the third night, Tobias was told that he will become one with God. The three Kenshos spoken of then in the Old Testament. And all you have to do is go through the part at the end of this, of the lotus blossom, which is the Hasidic Jewish teachings, to discover exactly the same sections that I have spoken of just now. The same three sections. I'm going to have to work awfully fast, and I'm only going to be able to sketch over the canvas, and I'm only going to be able to do half of it today, all right? He does make one interesting point. An individual, by depriving himself of his appetites for the delights of hearing, lives in darkness and emptiness in this sense. By depriving himself of the pleasure of seeing things, he lives in darkness and poverty in this sense, etc. He goes on through the five senses, how to enter by the five sense gates. But one does not deliberately set out to deprive oneself of these things. One finds how little one actually needs. And then when the chips are down, one knows one does not need anything whatsoever, and they drop off naturally. I feel a little worried by how many words St. John has made of something which, when the time is right, is extraordinarily simple. First of all, in answer to this query, it is true that not all the appetites are equally detrimental, nor are all equally a hindrance to the soul. I am speaking of the voluntary appetites, such as breathing, eating, and sleeping, because the natural ones are little or no hindrance at all to the attainment of union, provided they do not receive one's constant consent, nor pass beyond the first movements in which the rational will plays no role, i.e., if one eats when one is hungry and sleeps when one is tired, if one needs no more than one actually absolutely has to have. And this is exactly what Zen is telling you when it says 6 parts of a full stomach support the man and the other 2 support his doctor. You do not need to overeat. You do not need to oversleep. You do not need a tremendous amount of clothing. Natural appetites, the body, since it is through its ages that we reach God or the cosmic Buddha, it is very important that we do not destroy it and that we do not insult it. It has natural rights. Those rights include proper sleep, proper care, proper food. It does not mean indulgence. And this is what he is speaking of here. All appetites are not wrong. Do not go out and commit suicide in order to return to God. That will get you nowhere. What you have to do is discipline yourself to know how little you can do with. And this is one of the things that the Zen monastery will teach you. How little you really need and how beautifully comfortable and happy you can be with it. And how healthy you can be with it. All appetites are not wrong. He then goes on to speak of something else. In the state of divine union, a man's will is so completely transformed into God's will that it excludes anything contrary to God's will, and in all and through all is motivated by the will of God. Now, if you remember, I said earlier that you could only make this union if you truly wanted to be in the same way as God himself, if you wanted to be like. Therefore, you cannot retain anything that is ungodly and make this union. It is physically impossible. You cannot maintain anything, any desire, any possession, anything whatsoever that the cosmic Buddha would not himself possess or want and become one with him. So in that sense, one has to aspire absolutely to imitate or emulate the cosmic Buddha. Only by this emulation is the marriage possible. And remember who is asking for the marriage. The cosmic Buddha does not have to let down his standards in order that we can join him. It is for us to raise our standards. He is never going to let down his. Because since he is all purity, that which is impure cannot be admitted. Therefore, until one is willing to give up absolutely everything, entrance into this state is not possible. He continues, here we have the reason for stating that the two wills become one, and this one will is God's will, which becomes also the soul's will. If a man should desire an imperfection unwanted by God, this one will of God could be destroyed because of the desire for what God does not will. Therefore it is not possible for such a person to reach God. If anyone is to reach perfect union with God through his will and love, he must obviously first be freed from every appetite, however slight, that is not godly. That is, he must not give the consent of his will knowingly to an imperfection, that he must have the power and freedom to be able, upon advertence, to refuse this consent. He must, therefore, since he is becoming one, be completely willing to be consumed into this one will. And thus, the Buddhist may say truthfully, by forsaking self, the universe grows I. By giving up self, he receives all. But the all he receives is not the former self. Gautama the Buddha is born out of this I. You've all been reading the Dankoroku this week. This new Shakyamuni is not the old Gautama. Shakyamuni is born out of this I. What is spoken of there is the transference of wills that St. John of the Cross is speaking of here. At the bottom of this picture, it's not been put on there, but it's between the four bottom columns, is something which I can only describe as the Western version of the Scripture of Great Wisdom. And for those who find the Scripture of Great Wisdom almost impossible to follow, I would say that this is the finest thing you can read as a companion to it. The beauty of all of this is that you note that at no time has St. John of the Cross mentioned doctrine. He bends over backwards all the time to try and find pieces of Scripture that'll prove him right, and more often than not they prove irrelevant. I've left a tremendous amount out, but what he does do is he makes it very clear that he knows the place spoken of in the Scripture of Great Wisdom, and can put it into Western terminology. I'd like you to listen to this. To reach satisfaction in all, desire its possession in nothing. To come to possess all, desire the possession of nothing. To arrive at being all, desire to be nothing. To come to the knowledge of all, desire the knowledge of nothing. To come to the pleasure you have not, you must go by a way in which you enjoy not. To come to the knowledge that you do not know you have, you must go by a way in which you do not know. To come to the possession that you do not know you have, you must go by a way in which you do not know you possess. To come to be what you do not know you are, you must go by a way in which you are not. Do you understand this? It is the most perfect example of the scripture of great wisdom ever written in English. Yes, go on. No form, no earth, no ear, eye, tongue, nose, body, mind. Yes.
Yeah.
And then finally we grasp nothing.
The pure.
Yes, yes.
What you used to call the void.
Yep. For to go from all to the all. No, when you turn towards something, you cease to cast yourself upon the all, i.e. when you turn away. For to go from all that you have, to the true all, you must deny yourself everything, all in all. And when you come to the possession of that true all, you must possess it without wanting anything, for you cannot possess it by wanting it. Because if you desire to have something in that all, your treasure in God is not purely all. In this nakedness the spirit finds its true quietude and rest, i.e. its true zazen. For in coveting nothing, nothing raises it up, and nothing weighs it down, because it is in the center of its true humility. When it covets something in this very desire, it is wearied. In this place there is absolutely nothing. It is such an exquisite... I'm amazed that there's anybody here who doesn't understand it. I would very much like to see this actually put in with the Scripture of Great Wisdom as a commentary on it, because I think a lot of Western people could understand the Scripture of Great Wisdom a lot better. And then you get Meister Eckhart, who put it even more tersely. And a man shall be free and as pure as the day he entered into his mother's womb, when he wants nothing, has nothing, and knows nothing. Such a man has true spiritual poverty. And that is what the vow of poverty really referred to. It didn't refer to physical possessions. As it says at in the last picture, or next to last picture of the Hui Ming Ching. Where is it? Not yet having arrived at the other shore, he cannot do without things. On arriving at the other shore, he can use them again. But he doesn't need them. He can use them. When you're in that particular place, that is where one needs nothing, has nothing, and knows nothing. One of the things I would like to see people do, if they have copies of this book, only if they have copies of this book, is to take a great deal of care studying this particular section in connection with the Scripture of Great Wisdom. It's on page 103 and 104. Achieve the liberation, the true liberation of the spirit, it is advantageous for the soul, or Buddha nature, to depart in the dark night, that is, in the privation of all satisfactions, and in the mortification of all appetites. Mortification has become a nasty word. What it really means is not allowing the appetites to be in possession of you. 6 parts of the full stomach support the man, and 8 parts support the other 2 supporting his doctor. That is the true meaning of mortification. It does not mean, see how little I can eat, nor does it mean, see how strong I am, you can beat me 90 times. Look at me, I'm a great man. There were periodically monks in Swordiji who got this backwards. There is a lovely story told that I have told on a number of occasions to people in Shasta of one young American who turned up for Jukai in Swordiji and complained bitterly afterwards that he had not been disciplined nearly enough. He expected to be beaten and flogged and marched about. And this was at a tea party with the Archbishop Soto Zen, who looked at me and wondered what he was complaining about, and I decided, well, I'd better translate it, since the young man may know enough Japanese not to be able to do it himself, and it'd be better if I did it. And Soto Zen looked at me, then looked slightly wicked, and said, aha, I see. Picked up a huge vat, is the only word, of cream cakes, handed them to him and said, eat the lot. And the young man had been complaining about having to eat cream cakes and being well treated. Discipline is not always what one wants it to be. There is nothing very spectacular in curbing your appetite. There is something very spectacular in starving yourself so that you look lean and miserable, and everybody says, what a holy monk. But if all you're doing is eating 6 parts of a full stomach instead of 8, you look good and healthy. You're not going to get any sympathy. Who is going to get sympathy out of who is going to regard eating a whole dish of cream cakes as a discipline? It was a murderous one for him. You have to remember it does not always work as you want it to. And you have to know what mortification really is. It mortifies because you get no feedback either way. It is not mortification if you get a feedback from somebody who says, what a holy monk you look like. That isn't mortification. That's self-aggrandizement. Be careful then what it means to be mortified. My house being now all stilled means that the house of all the appetites, as well as body and mind, the sensitive part of the soul, is now stilled, and the desires quietened and lulled. This is the state of true meditation. As regards this road to union, it means that one must enter on the road that leaves one's own road behind, i.e., leaving one of the 2 side roads. This means that there has to be faith that there is a middle road. It implies that one is turning from one's own mode, entry into what has no mode. That is the road that cannot be seen. If you remember, in the first of the 5 pictures at the beginning, how is there a way up the glass mountain? How do I go up this glass mountain? How do I climb it? I do not know how I am going to climb it. I am willing to climb it, i.e., I have the faith that if there is anything that can help, I am willing, here am I, help me to climb. This is the sort of faith, the starkness of faith, that is necessary to climb the mountain. Here is this huge mountain. If you mistake the way, there will arise obstructing mountains and great rivers. Here is a great mountain. I do not know how to climb it, but I am willing to. And immediately one has climbed the mountain. That is the true meaning of faith in Buddhism and in Christianity and Judaism and Taoism. Passing beyond all that is naturally and spiritually intelligible or comprehensible, a person ought to desire with all his might to attain what in this life is unknowable and unimaginable. And parting company with all he can or does taste and feel, temporally and spiritually, he must ardently long to acquire what surpasses all taste and feeling. To be empty and free for the achievement of this, he should by no means seize upon what he receives spiritually or sensitively, nor should he cling to doctrines or beliefs. To understand the nature of the union that will take place, one should first know that God sustains every soul and dwells in it substantially. This is actually the proof of all of us possessing the Buddha nature, only spoken in Christian terminology. God sustains every soul and dwells in it substantially, even though it may be that of the greatest sinner in the world. Still God dwells within it. This union between God and his creatures always exists. By it he conserves their being, so that if the union would end, they would immediately be annihilated and cease to exist. Consequently, in discussing union with God, we are not discussing the substantial union, i.e. the Buddha nature that always exists, which is always existing, but the union and transformation of the soul or Buddha nature in God, which takes place as a matter of training. This union is not always existing, but can be made to exist. But we find it only where there is likeness of love and a desire to be one with God. We will call it the union of likeness, and the former the essential or substantial union. The union of likeness is supernatural, the other natural. The natural union, normal possession of the Buddha nature by all beings, and the supernatural union which takes place by training. The supernatural union exists when God's will and the soul's are in conformity and complete agreement, so that nothing in the one is repugnant to the other. When the soul completely rids itself of what is repugnant and unconformed to the divine will, it rests transformed in God through eternal love. That is the best piece of Buddhism I've read in years, and it's imperfect Christian terminology. One does not have to go to other dusty lands, as Dogen says, to find the truth. But it sometimes helps an awful lot to get some of the rubbish that people have piled up on the truth out of the way to see what is really going on at a much deeper level. Although a person may have truly reached union with God, this union will be proportioned to his lesser or greater capacity. For not all souls attain an identical degree of union. This depends on what the Lord wishes to grant each one. Here we have a resemblance to the saints' vision of God in heaven. Some see more, others less, but all see him and are happy owing to the satisfaction of their capacity. I'm speaking here of the fact that some Kenshos seem to be much bigger than others, some smaller. But as I said on a number of occasions, being a little pregnant is still pregnant, whether it is only 1 day or 9 months. Seeing God is seeing God, even if you only see a footprint or only see a foot as it passes through a door. Seeing you have never be as if you had not seen. Do not look down on someone who has had a small Kensho. Do not worship someone who has had a big one. Just do your own training with all your might, as it says in the Hui Ming Ching. Don't wait to ask a bodhisattva. Get on with it yourself. Only fools wait to ask other people. As I wrote in my own book, I am selling water by the river. Everybody's saying, where do I drink? Where do I drink? And I'm saying, here, I've got the glasses. But you've got your own glass. You can dip in the river. So what have we got out of this so far? That they all do the same thing. You all have to start as a result of some violent and great love to leave one's own path and go up the center path, which one cannot find. One has to have faith that one can find this path. One also has to have faith that one can climb the mountains and the boulders. One has to clean up one's life absolutely in order to become fit to be one with that union. In that union, because in that union there can be no thing that is repugnant to either side, to either God or the cosmic Buddha, or to you. It has to be an absolutely pure union. And the first requirement is to get rid of all of the rubbish that you have created and to put right everything that you have put wrong to the very best of your ability. And then you may see the reflection of God. And then you take on to become one in such a way that you are even on a deeper level completely one with him. And then you receive, as it were, the tablets on the mountain. You discover the true meaning of perceptual truth. And then comes the last one that I'll be talking about next week, or the third one. This is only the tip of the iceberg, by the way. Then comes the third one, in which you go, in which you fly beyond the mountain, in which you leave everything behind. Do not think that just meditating is just looking at a wall. Too many people in this country have been stuck with stage 1. As I said in Selling Water by the River, there's always plenty of room at the top of the tree, and everybody's happy and contented if they get as far as Kanzi on meditation. But there's a lot higher than that. Don't be contented with third place when you can be one with the cosmic Buddha. And in that place, you have to experience it to know its joy. Don't believe any of this because I've told it you. Practice. I'm happy with what I've got. I'm not telling you you've got to have this. You came here, you wanted to learn this from me. If you try it and you find it, good. I will know if you find it. You'll turn the wheel in me, and I will turn the wheel in you. But I'm not converting anyone. I'm merely telling you, you have this within yourself, and that you can find it, and that all the great religions speak of it, loudly and clearly. I shan't be doing St. Teresa of Avila because, as I said, St. John of the Cross does her rather well for me. Now, we've run over rather late, but shall we do some meditation? Yes, go ahead.
In reading your account of it, I detect a very strong note throughout the whole thing of you're being very, very careful. Because quite often you quote the line, not to come too close or put yourself too far away. And I was wondering, it must be dangerous in a way, or it must be very easy to go wrong
yes.
when you're going through it.
Yes, you can make mistakes. You can make mistakes. And especially if you get excited by it. See, this is why you have all the scriptures constantly reciting day after day after day after day in the monastery. Don't come too close, don't go too far away, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that. So that when the moments come, you make all the right decisions. Now, a lot of people, when visions come, for example, oh wow, I have visions of God, I must be holy. Or everybody knows to get away from visions of hell. Everybody knows that one. But not everybody knows that it's important to get away from visions of heaven. Because having a vision of heaven doesn't make you any holier than dreaming that you're a millionaire makes you a penny richer in the morning.
Yeah.
All it is saying is, this is a possibility. You have worked this hard, now this is a possibility. And if you sit back and say, wow, I'm holy, and you don't keep your training up, then guess where the possibility is? It's right back in the hell pictures. But you don't keep your training up just because you don't want to go back to the hills. You keep your training up because it's the only right thing to do. It's known as training for training's sake. But there's a lovely bit in this book. The same piece I was reading from about by the way, we copied out the original Chinese text for you, just in case mine and Margarite's translation went haywire in a few places, and some scholars wanted to check it. When a man has reached the night of Genshin, the dark night of the soul, they are exhausted. The three spirits, the three parasites are really dead beat. That's why Genshin, he's fought battle hard and now he's ready for Genshin. And so they go to the ruler of heaven, i.e. to the cosmic Buddha, to tell him of all the wrongdoing of this follower of the way. Now, that I think is a slightly flowery way of saying that when one comes to die, everything that one's done wrong comes up with which one can judge oneself. Now, if you judge yourself that you are fundamentally evil, instead of saying, fine, yes, I did wrong, as it says in the verse of Sangye, to sit up straight in the presence of the Buddha and say, I did wrong and I'm going to do something about it. If instead one says, my God, look how awful I am, and judges oneself, then one will definitely die. One has gone to the ruler of heaven and said, I'm lousy. But the ruler of heaven hasn't said that. Now, if on the other hand, you say, all right, I'm going to do something about it, thus they try to cut short the period of life and cause his spirit to be reborn in an animal form, leaving themselves free rein on the earth. You can turn away from God and allow this to happen. Or you can say, no, I did wrong, and I'm going to put it right. And immediately you're in this center place again.
And the putting it right is going all the way.
It's not only going all the way, it is literally putting it right.
Yeah.
In my case, it was writing all sorts of letters to stray people with whom I'd had scraps over the last 50-odd years. And saying, look, sorry about it. Some of them must have wondered what on earth it was about, because some of them were about 30 years old. That's neither here nor there. And their responses were interesting. They all proceeded to write and tell me what they were doing right now. Not one of them mentioned what I said. But that's fine, too. But you see what I'm getting at? That's the... And that's how you can make the mistakes. Because you can look at the black lotus and say, all right, I can get into that black lotus, I go down to hell. Or you can see the writing on it which says, nothing matters, part of the Anya Shingyo. Don't worry about all this stuff. None of it matters. You've got to put it right. It doesn't matter in the real sense. Just put it right. Don't judge yourself.
That's the same as last week when Reverend Felder talked about past lives coming up. They'll only come up once if you really look at them and see what they mean. And then in daily life, do what they tell you to do.
Yeah.
If you let the full picture come up, it shows you how you're going wrong in your daily life and what you have to do.
Right.
And,
yeah.
then you just offer it
They're
up.
they're merely there telling you, you have a potential. Just as the visions say, all right, at the moment you have a potential for hell. Now you have a potential for heaven. But they're not guarantees. It's very important to know that they're not guarantees. Yes?
It really is interesting to see how all of this really does, you take it right to your kitchen table. I mean, it's right in everyday life. It's not some mystical experience. It's apart from daily living.
Yep.
Really?
Go ahead.
When you were speaking about parasites, I was thinking that the attitude and the tone to approach this is almost in the Buddhist exorcism, exhortation, word is not right, is that you can't set up a war with these attitudes and aspects, because then it's just reverting to pushing them away and giving them incredible force.
Incredible power.
Yeah.
Yes.
And not realizing that there is a purity in them also.
Yeah. Not realizing that converted greed is compassion, and converted hate is love, and converted delusion is wisdom. You have to convert your parasites, not ill-treat them. And above all, not let them ill-treat you. Now, this is something else. We've got the pages, by the way, for those of you who want the information on how the devil changed from being an adversary to almost a god, the devil. And it's interesting to watch, to note that the Jews had got it right, and it was the Christians who gradually got it wrong, which is a somewhat worrying thought. However, the fact remains that there came a time during all the things that were happening to me when I was hating Mara for what he was doing, and then one day I sat back and said, wait a minute. Thank you, you're showing me scads of aspects of me I never knew existed. And the instant I was grateful to Mara, Mara ceased to exist. In other words, you have to come completely to terms with Mara and recognize what Mara is. He's that which gets in your way to show you what is in your way. He's not got no evil intention. He's showing you what is impure in you, which makes the union impossible. You. Yes.
Is it, Mara, and is it common when you begin to practice for the pleasurable opportunities to just suddenly abound? And Nobody knows how much past karma anybody's carrying about. We're all totally different. Nobody knows, therefore, how big are the attachments that any particular person's going to have. Some people, when they start meditating or when they start training, seem to have almost nothing happen. Some have so many attachments appear that it's almost as though they're being hounded by them. Some people have so many catastrophes appear that you wonder what on earth they've let loose, and they're almost afraid to go on meditating. Some people, without ever meditating at all, just spontaneously suddenly have a life pop out for no reason that anybody can see, and they're the ones who are in the biggest danger, because they're the ones who, having got no knowledge of it, are likely to go off and talk to their shrink, forgive me if that's offensive to anybody present, they're likely to go off and see their therapist and make mistakes. Yeah, go ahead.
I've made an observation about things that happen when people begin to train. Usually, one of two or three things will happen. Most people, when they begin to meditate, if they sit down and just try to look at a wall for half an hour and just be present in the wall, become painfully aware of how distracted they are most of the time, how their minds just will wander completely without, they have no control over it. And it's so alarming, it's disturbing. And when they begin to try to discipline themselves, it's like a struggle begins, and all hell breaks loose. That's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is that some people are really tensed up and at odds with the world all the time. And when they begin to sit, what they do is they relax. And when they relax, all of a sudden the world looks much better to them. And the world becomes a really wonderful place. And then this distractions start to happen. Oh, it's so wonderful that they forget why they started. And the other one's a little more complicated. It's just that all of a sudden well, I won't go into the other one. That's just too complicated.
I think it's a bit like putting your foot down on the accelerator of life on the road. All of a sudden you're taking the curves and you're taking your karma much faster and you have to deal with it. I mean, you're going to take the same road probably. But boy, when you go in and say, okay, God, later on I want to grow spiritually and I want to become one with you. And he says, okay, fine, here, do this, do this.
It does take off, as I told people here a few weeks ago. It does one day take off with such a vengeance. It can be scary, yes.
Explain a little bit more about, you say you have to be completely willing to be consumed,
Yes.
and then you talk about it taking off or having the fire play with you. How do those
That is still being completely willing. And no matter how fast it is going, and if it goes too fast it can kill you, and no matter how fast it is going, being willing to let it go that fast, and if it is God's will that you shall die, then being willing to let it happen, as our friend said, if it is His will that you go to hell, or to heaven, or to this place which is the real place, beyond both, because heaven and hell are as dangerous a pair of opposites as are Bodhisattva and Arahant. What really matters is what lies beyond them, and what includes the lot. And you see, when you have got Mara to the state that you realize he is merely the person who is helping you, then hell disappears anyway. And when you have got heaven to the state that you realize it is that which impedes you, because it is so comfortable from going all the way, when you have got beyond that situation, then you are in that place where there is no thing of which St. John of the Cross is speaking. But it's the fullest nothingness you're ever going to be in, because it is the love, the oneness with the cosmic Buddha or with God, when the two wills are one and there is nothing in either that is disliked by either. But the willingness is the faith. It's the external expression of the faith. No matter where you lead, there will I go, be it down to the depths of hell or up to the highest heaven. There will I gladly go and follow.
So in other words, it's going to happen anyway. The willingness is your part of it?
The willingness is your part in it. It will happen if you are willing. Lord, here am I. Take me. I am willing. And immediately the thing is open. And he or she is undutiful if they don't. So
the average Buddhist does not think of himself as being a holy or a saint if he gets a second or third kensho. He's merely done what is his rightful duty to do. I wanted you to understand that before I went any further on this. Interestingly enough, when I discussed this with the monks of Mount St. Bernard Abbey in England, they informed me that almost no Christian knew it, but that was also the rightful duty of a Christian as well. But somehow or other, somewhere down the line, it had got somewhat twisted and had turned into let everybody else do it for me that will. But that was not what it originally was meant to be, and if you study the ancient fathers, you'll discover that it is exactly the same as the Buddhist one, that everybody can do this and should be doing it. I thought I would give you that little piece of information. I have it in black and white as proofs, which is rather nice when it comes from a Christian source. The second thing I wanted to mention was we talked, I don't know if our friend's still here, it was you, I think. We talked about the possibilities of the loss of this in about the 9th century, 8th or 9th century. And in the beginning of the Parsival, book on Parsival, you'll find a picture very like this, only at the bottom, in the center, instead of a pathway, there is a hermit sitting, pointing to a path, and everybody's busy going up the other roads, but he's saying this is the rightful way. And 3/4 of the way up, there's the sun and the moon both lying in a rubbish can. And says, when one gets to the state when day and night no longer matter and none of the opposites matter, when you shine all the opposites into a rubbish can, then you can get to the top of the mountain. Now, I have not had enough time to really work on the book, and it would take me several years to get out of it as much as might be useful for this particular course, but any of you who get hold of it might find it useful as a comparison, as a possibly religious work that did encode what the 9th century lost. Just a matter of interest. It was you I talked about, wasn't it? Yeah. Very, very interesting. And apparently the search for the Holy Grail, I suspect, was actually what you found on top of the mountain. But it's become encoded into heaven alone knows what else. It was certainly wrongly used by the Nazis. That we know for certain. All right, got any questions?
Yes, I have a question. St. John of the Cross, you said, didn't need scriptures really to get to where he...
No.
No, you didn't quite say that. But I was always wondering about Bodhi, Dharma, and Jiyu-Kennett, and all.
Oh,
when
no,
they said that Buddhism was, doctrine itself was unnecessary.
Yes, it is unnecessary.
So, in other words, meditation is meditation, and you could do it.
You can do the whole. You can do the whole thing. No, it's all of Buddhism. You can do the whole thing through meditation. The value of scriptures is that it tells. The scriptures are really how other people did it, and the notes they left behind, telling you how they made it, and these are their notes, which might give you some help. But as something that is, this is the only way. That is wrong to believe that this is the only way. It's not. Well, this is one of the purposes of this particular class, to prove, to prove that no matter what way you choose, you can make it, and that they're all doing identically the same thing. Don't get caught and stuck in all these little external things that really don't matter very much. And you see, I asked you all to read Uji, which starts off as the secret of life is will. Words are its key, but it would be better actually if it said the secret of life is to be willing, i.e. to have faith and be willing, and words are its key, because the words of other people tell you how through their willingness they made it. Now there are a lot of people who are in the stage when nothing but doctrine will help them. Not everybody is going to make it to this spiritual state this time round.
And for them, the various doctrines during various lifetimes are variable. And all of these things point on to the next stage up. But a man who has had a broken leg and needs crutches, once the leg is mended, no longer needs the crutches. But he definitely needed them while they weren't mended.
I love to read, but I mean, I often wondered what they really meant when Jiyu-Kennett and Buddha Dharma.
That when you get down to the final thing, it's right beyond all the
In other
scriptures.
words, you don't need doctrine.
You don't need it, but it's awfully useful now and then. Yes. And don't make any mistake, they used it when they needed it. Yeah, go ahead, friend.
Well, that means that in our own meditation, we find our precepts. And
They always come down to the same bunch, though, except in one sense that every one of us has one or two that are more, what's the word? Germane, correct. More germane to us as individuals than others. Everybody has his own pet one that he breaks, so to speak. And that's the one that lights up like a red light. And so you almost get the parasites holding it up like they're saying, look, you can't go up.
well, then in your own meditation, you'd be able to answer any questions that you have about, say, for instance, whether you should become a monk or stay a layman.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes.
Be revealed to you.
Oh, yes. You will know within your own blood, bones, guts, you name it. You'll know with a vengeance. Yes. Go ahead, friend.
You said that there is, in essence, a window which passes before us when the spirit rises and it's time to
Yeah.
do your training.
Yeah.
And that this is not open all the time.
Well, it is open all the time, but there are times when we are more receptive to looking through it than at others. And
Times
that's...
when we come full opposite.
There are times when we're not doing this or walking around with a pair of bricked-up spectacles.
Okay. And then I have another question. It's in the precepts. It says, "Do not defame the three treasures." And then there's an explanation which says, "To do something by ourselves without copying others is to become an example to the world. And the merit of doing such a thing becomes the source of all wisdom." And I did not follow the leap from one to the other.
To be able to stand up truthfully and faithfully and say, I believe, whether the world believes or not. And in a Christian country, that if you're a Buddhist who stands up and says, I believe in Buddhism, I don't care whether the world likes it or lumps it.
That's not defaming.
It would be if you pretended you weren't a Buddhist. It also means one other thing. Don't deny them. You know, in Christianity you have Peter denying his God because he's scared.
You were saying earlier about the point that Mara was converted was the gratitude. And when I was sitting, I remembered that you had written in your journal in Soji that it seemed that was the junction when taking everything for your good.
Yes.
Yes,
accepting Mara.
Yes. Yeah, the tone of gratitude is the conversion
Yes.
of everything.
It doesn't matter whether they were doing it because they wanted to make a fool of me or because they hated women and foreigners. What they did it for doesn't matter. What matters is how I accept it, from my point of view. I make my karma, they make theirs. Go ahead.
I was going to say, that really seems to tie up what this lady here mentioned earlier about the conflicts that you get into society, standing up to be a Buddhist in spite of the criticism and stuff. It seems like when you get down to real spirituality, there are fewer conflicts with people in daily life. It seems like the conflicts of religion in daily life comes about when you're hung up in doctrine and form. You say, my form is right, yours is wrong, and so on. But I find that true spirit, the closer you get to real spirituality, the less problems you have in daily life with people, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
That it,
Well, that particular one, that particular precept, I had to really take to heart for years because I was the one and only Buddhist
yeah.
frequently in the places where I was.
Mm.
And
that's
there was often a lot of temptation to, shall we say, stretch the truth a little or not say it, or careful how you go with the truth under your coat. There were a lot of temptations like that, and they were quite big.
Mm.
And there was a time when it was so risky that I almost got to the state of going around with a nice little pat story that I'd made up, which I could come out with for my own safety. And then one day I said, forget this is wrong. This is evil, this is lying. This was years and years ago. Just stopped it. But anything for peace and quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also why you need doctrines and the like. Because there's always going to be somebody who's in the situation who needs that particular doctrine to push him on to the next stage in his training. And there's always going to be somebody who's ready for vegetarianism or fruitarianism, and there's always going to be somebody who's not quite yet, who's trying to make the transition, for which a dairy restaurant is fine, and there's always going to be some... You see what I'm saying? Everybody is in a different place of training. If we were all in the same place, it would be very simple. No two people are. And you can't impose a trip on somebody and say ours is the one and only right way. That was another interesting point they made last night. I was very glad to hear Professor Needleman teaching Buddhism and not knowing it. It was very, very good of him on Channel 54. But that's exactly what he was doing, because you can't put your trip on another person. You can share it with him if he wants to listen. And if he thinks it's a good one and he wants to go along with it, that's just fine. But you can't make him buy it. And you shouldn't try. Which is one of the reasons I think they let me teach meditation of this too here. Okay, friends.